Hello. In this video, I would like to introduce the Motorola Razr 40 review. I trust that this video is very useful for all of you. When you have already watched the video, you know about Motorola Razr 40 clearly, and it helps you in making a decision to choose a better smartphone for your work and lifestyles. I am introducing to you the detailed Motorola Razr 40 review that is important, especially alternatives, verdict, pros and cons at the end of the video. Please kindly enjoy watching the video as following. The Motorola Razr 40 is a toned-down version of the Razr 40 Ultra, one meant to make Razr a mass-market phone once again. These days it's not a flip-up phone anymore, but a foldable, yet operating it brings the same coolness you got from the V3 almost 20 years ago. The Razr 40 makes the foldable experience more accessible than ever, but it still feels like a perfectly balanced phone. It has the same high-quality build as the Razr 40 Ultra, the same large internal display with clean software and even a bigger battery and larger main camera sensor. It misses on the large external display and gets a mid-range Snapdragon 7 Gen 1 chipset, but manages to shave over €200 from the asking price. The Razr 40 is of the same size and weight as the Ultra, but it has vegan leather exterior instead of glass. And while its outer display is much smaller at 1.5 inches, it can still serve for quick notification checks and camera viewfinder. Go past that and you see the same 6.9-inch foldable LTPO AMOLED from the Ultra with extended 1080p resolution, 1B colors, up to 144Hz refresh rate and HDR10+ support. Well, the Ultra's max refresh rate was higher at up to 165Hz, but we barely ever saw the phone even use that. The most notable change is the SoC, now a Snapdragon 7 Gen 1 chip instead of the flagship 8 Plus Gen 1 inside the Ultra. And suspect the superior battery life that should come from this transition will be more important to the Razr target audience than the lost performance. Moving on to cameras, we see the main 64MP sensor of the Razr 40 is actually notably bigger than the 12MP imager on the Ultra. The 13MP ultra-wide camera with AF and macro is the same, as well as the 32MP selfie cam embedded in the foldable screen. What's missing in the camera department is 4K at 60fps option and HDR10 video capturing. Moving on to the battery, the Razr 40 has a 4,200 mAh cell, up from 3,800 mAh on the Ultra. The 30W wired and 5W wireless charging speeds are shared between the two Motorola foldable phones, though. The Razr 40 runs on clean Android 13 with a couple of Motorola tweaks and apps, a combo many have come to love through the years. The Motorola Razr 40 is officially not a waterproof smartphone. It has a water-repellent coating to its internals, meaning it will probably withstand the occasional splash of water or some raindrops, but it should not get properly wet. Design, build quality, and handling. The Motorola Razr 40 is your typical flip phone of modern variety. It has a large internal foldable display covered with a thin plastic protective film, two rear panels made of vegan leather, i.e. fancy plastic, aluminum frame, and a stainless steel teardrop hinge in the middle. This Razr 40 measures and weighs the same as the Razr 40 Ultra, adopts the same hinge and design, and has a bunch of exterior similarities, even if the very different external display may make you miss them. The Ultra had two versions, glass and vegan leather, but even there we liked the leather design better. It just offers better grip, and while everyone will have a different opinion on which one looks better, the smudge resistance will be universally appreciated. The Motorola logo and the Razr logo are engraved in the vegan leather, enhancing the premium look. While the edge-to-edge external display of the 40 Ultra is still way cooler, we still like the seamless transition from the cameras to the external display on the regular Razr 40. And the glass is jutting out so little that it doesn't make the phone wobble or unstable, not that it will ever be sitting on this side. Not only is the overall design great, but the Razr 40 build is simply outstanding. From the selection of materials to the precise execution, it enables excellent grip, feel and handling. The only thing we didn't like is the basic ingress protection, IP52. Let's now have a tour around the Razr 40 and explore its noteworthy bits. The 6.9-inch foldable AMOLED display is the true centerpiece of the Razr, and it's as gorgeous as it looks on the promo materials. The display goes frame to frame with a less than 1 mm bezel, with rounded corners and one tiny punch hole for the selfie camera. There is a crease in the middle of the display, but in fully unfolded position it is not visible and we could barely feel it. In fact, we had to consciously search for it, which means Motorola did a great job here. The screen's thin plastic bezel is still inevitable, and so is the plastic screen protector, making sure you don't scratch the relatively soft foldable panel. Motorola has put a rather large disclaimer on the phone's wrapping not to remove the protector yourself. The earpiece is placed between the aluminum frame and the screen's plastic bezel. Its outlet is angled at about 45 degrees, which works for great earpiece experience and a loudspeaker. Indeed, the Razr 40 has a stereo speaker system with the quieter one being the earpiece, and the main speaker placed at the bottom of the phone. Alongside said speaker are the USB-C port and the primary microphone, surrounded by barely visible logos and numbers. The top of the Razr 40 has another microphone, while the left side houses the SIM tray. The separate volume keys, as well as the power/lock button, are on the right. The surface of the power key accommodates the always-on fingerprint scanner, which works swiftly and reliably. We've already talked about the beautiful rear of the Razr 40. The top half has the large black plate housing the two cameras, a single LED flash, the laser emitter and receiver, and the 1.5-inch external display. This black glass might be large, but it is barely jutting out and will neither make the Razr unstable, nor scratch your glass table. The outer OLED can display several widgets, and serve as a viewfinder for capturing selfies with the rear cameras. It's a far more limited functionality than the Ultra's full-blown launcher, so you'll need to open the Motorola Razr 40 far more frequently. The steel teardrop hinge allows the two halves of the Razr to close flat and with no gaps all round. It supports arbitrary angles, which enables some extra use cases. One possible criticism is its tightness. It is nearly impossible to open the Razr with one hand as it requires quite a lot of force to operate. The Razr 40 is 7.4 mm thin, or 15.8 mm when folded, and it weighs 188 grams. It shares a lot with the Ultra, but brings an even larger battery, which is always a nice thing to have. Displays. The Motorola Razr 40 centerpiece is the large 6.9-inch LTPO AMOLED foldable screen with all sorts of niceties such as 10-bit color depth, 144 Hz adaptive refresh rate, up to 360 Hz touch response, and HDR10+ support. This appears to be same panel as on the Razr 40 Ultra, but dialed down to from the 165 Hz refresh rate. The foldable screen has an extended 1080p resolution, 1080 by 2640 pixels, adding up to 413 ppi density. It has a tiny punch hole for the selfie camera and it's covered with a plastic screen protector that you should not peel off to ensure the proper operation of the screen. The outer display is much smaller than on the 40 Ultras. It's a 1.5-inch AMOLED piece of 194 by 368 pixels, 268 ppi, covered by a piece of Gorilla Glass Victus. As you can imagine, this screen cannot offer complete Android experience as on the Ultra. It just displays several widgets and can act as a camera viewfinder, too. The external display is too small to perform our display tests, nor would they make much sense as its quality is far from critical for the operation of the Razr 40. So we jump directly to the large foldable panel. We recorded a maximum of 505 nits of brightness at point white when manually controlling the brightness from the slider. The screen can go much higher in auto mode, though, up to 1064 nits when faced with a bright source of light. Those matched the measurements we got on the Razr 40 Ultra screen. The minimum brightness at point white was just 2.9 nits. Battery life. The Motorola Razr 40 has a 4,200 mAh battery, up from 3,800 mAh cell inside the Ultra. The Razr 40 scored a total endurance rating of 85 hours, which is lower than we hoped, but there's more to the story. The phone did very well across most tests. It lasted nearly a day on voice calls, over 14 hours on web browsing and over 14 hours on local video playback. What brought the overall score down was standby performance, just like it was on the Ultra, about 200 hours. And here you can compare the Motorola Razr 40 with some competitors. Charging speed. The Motorola Razr 40 supports 30W turbo power wired charging, just like the Ultra. It ships with a 33W power adapter and a USB-C to A cable in the box. 5 minutes on that charger gave us 12% of charge, 15 minutes to 31%, 30 minutes to 57%. A full charge 0% to 100% required 61 minutes, not the best numbers around, but certainly among the better in the foldable game. The Razr 40 also beat the Razr 40 Ultra with its smaller battery capacity and identical power adapter. The extra screen of the Ultra is clearly being detrimental to heat dissipation. The Motorola Razr 40 also supports 5W wireless charging, in case you have a Qi-compatible pad in your car or on your desk. Optimized battery charging option is available, too. If enabled, the phone will learn your charging habits and will recharge the last 20% of the battery just before you unplug it. This is particularly helpful if you recharge your phone overnight. There is also overcharge protection, which will stop charging the phone if it has been plugged in continuously for more than 3 days. Speakers. The Motorola Razr 40 features 2 stereo speakers, the earpiece acting as the second one, alongside the primary speaker near the USB-C port at the bottom. Naturally, this represents a hybrid setup, where the bottom speaker is louder with more bass and mids, while the top one focuses mostly on high frequencies and is overall quieter. The earpiece is pointed at 45 degrees or so, which makes for some decent audio balance, and we had some very good experience with the speakers and multimedia. Even better, they scored a very good mark on our loudness test and we heard good vocals, high frequencies, and even some bass. Clean Android 13 with a few Moto tricks. Motorola has always been keen on the uncluttered Android experience, and this has been one of the main appeals of its phones. However, in the context of a foldable smartphone, some may think it's more of a drawback. After all, foldable smartphones require a bit of extra touch to take advantage of the form factor. The good news is that Android isn't stale and has matured enough to accommodate the new foldable form factor, and Motorola has worked closely with developers to polish the user experience. Moreover, the OEM promises 3 major OS updates for the Razr 40 and Razr 40 Ultra. If you've ever used a Motorola smartphone or any other handset running a clean Android, you'd feel right at home. There's nothing out of the ordinary when it comes to aesthetics, navigation, and Android intrinsic features. In a typical Motorola fashion, there are a handful of additional features for the main screen along with some exclusive ones thanks to the new external 1.5-inch display. Pretty much all of the additional features can be found in the Moto app, along with some useful tips on how to make the most out of the Razr 40. Finally, you can also use the main cameras for selfies. There is a specific gesture to activate the camera app on the external screen while the phone is folded. You can then swipe from the sides to change the camera or the camera mode. Some apps support semi-folded position and will split the screen in two, mostly for keyboard or camera purposes. Introduced in 2021, Motorola's Ready for platform enables a multitude of use cases that put the phone in the center of a big screen experience. Connecting a TV or a monitor allows you to get a Windows desktop-like environment, play a game on your phone, display it on the external screen, or even have a video chat on a larger display. And while this feature only worked with an appropriate USB-C to USB-C cable in the past, you can now make the connection using Miracast, which most modern TVs, monitors and PCs support. If you don't have a mouse and/or keyboard handy, the phone's screen can be used as a trackpad and/or keyboard. You can also use Ready for on a Windows-based PC. It runs within a window on your desktop. This is helpful when you want to run an Android app from your computer or multitask between devices on just one screen. Another use case of Ready for on a Windows PC is for video calls, where you can use the phone's camera to capture yourself and an external display to see the other participants. The final Ready for use case is for gaming on a bigger screen, be it TV or laptop/monitor. You connect an external controller and run the game on the phone, with the obvious benefit being the larger display for gameplay. It works exactly like Samsung's DeX, bringing a desktop environment-friendly experience to Android and its apps. All in all, Motorola's vision for Android is somewhat different than Google's, as it provides a couple of unique features and was able to polish the foldable experience beyond the scope of vanilla Android. The best part is that the software didn't feel unfinished in any way, quite the opposite actually. Our experience was bug-free and the system ran smoothly without any slowdowns or hiccups. Performance. The second significant difference between the Razr 40 and Razr 40 Ultra is the chipset. While the Ultra relies on the flagship-grade Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1, the Razr 40 utilizes the Snapdragon 7 Gen 1. It is a chipset that was almost a year ago but has only seen limited adoption. It is based on the 4nm manufacturing process and includes Qualcomm's dedicated AI engine. The CPU contains an octa-core CPU with 1x2.4 GHz Cortex-A710, 3x2.36 GHz Cortex-A710 and 4x1.8 GHz Cortex-A510 cores, while the GPU is the Adreno 644. The latter is supposed to be 20% faster than the one in Snapdragon 778G, while AI-related tasks are said to be 30% faster. In addition, the Adreno frame motion engine claims to boost frame rates twofold while maintaining the same power consumption as the Snapdragon 778G. Although, that's hardly an issue for now given that most games are locked at 60 frames per second years after the mass adoption of HRR screens. The base memory configuration is 8 GB per 128 GB, but that's only available in select markets. There is also the 8 GB per 256 GB version like our unit, which is the standard version in most countries, while some also get a 12 GB per 256 GB variant. The Snapdragon 7 Gen 1 has a capable processor performance, and while not the best of the flip-able bunch, it is still quite competitive. The SD7 Gen 2 CPU inside the POCO F5, here for comparison reasons, was obviously a much better choice though. A total of 3 selfie cameras. The Motorola Razr 40 comes with a 64MP primary camera and a 13MP ultra-wide shooter with autofocus that is also capable of close-up shots. There is another camera inside the foldable screen's punch hole with a 32MP sensor, which will likely be relegated to video calling duties. After all, one of the best things about foldables is that you can capture selfies with the far superior main cameras. All cameras support 4K video capturing. The primary camera on the back features a 64MP 1/2 OmniVision OV64B sensor with a quad-Bayer filter. The sensor has 0.7 MP pixels, and after the 4-in-1 binning, you'd be getting a 16 MP photo with 1.4 M equivalent pixels. This sensor sits behind a stabilized 25mm f/1.8 lens with OIS and supports PDAF. A high-res 64 MP mode, Pro mode, as well as night vision, are available for this camera. The ultra-wide camera uses the 13 MP Hynix High 1336 sensor with 1.12 M pixels. It sports a 16mm f/2.2 lens and supports autofocus. Thanks to that, it can double as macro shooter, and there is even a dedicated macro mode available on the viewfinder. The selfie camera uses a 32 MP OmniVision OV32B 1/3 quad Bayer for cell in OV speak sensor with 0.7 M pixels with 8 MP images coming out by default. You can shoot in 32 MP too. It sits behind a 25mm f/2.4 lens with fixed focus. Camera app. The camera app on the Razr 40 is custom despite the relatively stock-looking software package. When it comes to its implementation on the unfolded phone, it's essentially identical to what you get on regular, bar-style motos. The basics are as usual. The camera modes are arranged in a customizable carousel formation, with the More tab at the rightmost end of the carousel holding the rarely used shooting modes. Pro mode gives you full control over the camera settings like white balance, ISO, up to 3200, focus, shutter speed, up to 32s, and exposure compensation, and it works on all cameras. A tiny live histogram is provided, but there's no focus peaking or zebras. Additional settings for each camera mode can be found by swiping down in the viewfinder. There's a tiny bar at the far end to indicate that, but if you miss it, you may be left wondering where some controls are, like the flash and self-timer settings in photo mode and frame rate in video mode. The gear icon for the general settings menu houses even more settings. You can also run the camera app on the external display while the Razr 40 is folded. There is a special twist gesture, which activates the cameras and the small screen lights up. You can then swipe from the left or right to change between photos, videos, portraits, or you can swipe from the top or bottom sides to switch between the cameras. You can use cropped view for both portrait and landscape orientation, or you can disable the crop for when shooting landscape selfies. The mirrored selfie option applies as well when using the rear cameras for selfies too. The competition. The Motorola Razr 40 turned out to be an excellent little smartphone with premium design and cool form factor, flagship-grade display, very capable cameras, loud stereo speakers and solid battery life. Its external display turned out to be quite useful even if small, and the overall operation is smooth even if the phone is not necessarily a gaming powerhouse. The Motorola Razr 40 launches at about €800 to €850 depending on the market, which is the lowest a flip foldable phone has started at. However, it can be matched by some of last year's models that have received price cuts in the meantime. Of course, if you like the software package, but want a little more power and a more capable external screen, you can consider the Razr 40 Ultra. It is about €300 more expensive over the Razr 40, but certainly adds a bit of extra flashiness, which is why people like flip phones in the first place. The older Motorola Razr 2022 costs the same as the Razr 40, and it also offers a larger external AMOLED, more powerful Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 and slightly more capable primary camera. This Razr 2022 has much inferior battery life, though, and its selfie camera is not as good. While the Galaxy Z Flip 5 will hit the shelves in 2 weeks, the older Galaxy Z Flip 4 still makes sense as a competitor to the Razr 40. In Europe, the Flip 4 can be had for just €700 and will give you a water-resistant body, more powerful Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 chipset, and it has a better selfie camera. Samsung's foldable software is also the best one out there. However, if you equalize the storage and factor in the extra costs of getting a charger and a case that the Moto Razr gets for free, the pricing advantage of the Samsung disappears. If you live in markets where the Huawei P50 Pocket and the OPPO Find N2 Flip are available, you should check those out too. The Huawei P50 Pocket has faster hardware, better photo quality across the board, and faster charging. It is also cheaper at about €700. The issue with the lack of Google mobile services remains, and you'll be missing on 5G connectivity. The P50 Pocket has a smaller, even if cooler, external screen, no ingress protection whatsoever, and its battery life is rather poor. The OPPO Find N2 Flip, on the other hand, is a truly great flagship with excellent screens and hardware, as well as battery life. It omits ingress protection, too, but it's closer in price to the Razr 40 Ultra than the Vanilla 40. Our verdict. So all things considered, the Motorola Razr 40 can stand its ground successfully against most competitors, with the 2022 Galaxy Z Flip 4 perhaps the only one to edge its value for money proposition. However, odds are it too won't be easy to find in a couple of months, as Samsung focuses on the Flip 5, and if the Razr 40 manages to shave some more euros from its price as did its predecessor, it will find itself in the comfortable position of being the cheapest but still great clamshell foldable. After all, the Motorola Razr 40 is a modern foldable with exquisite design that is comfortable to hold and operate too. The latter bits are surprisingly rare in the segment, with the Galaxy Flip 4 and OPPO Find N2 Flip being properly slippery device. We found its foldable OLED to be of excellent quality, while its external OLED turned out to be quite useful, if a step behind the 2023 trends. The loud stereo speakers were also a nice touch, as well as the solid camera quality across the board. The battery life turned out to be adequate for such a device, and if Motorola addresses the high standby drain with an update, it could well become great. The Snapdragon 7 Gen 1 processor is perhaps more than enough for the category, as we don't see many heavy gamers going for flip phones. So all things considered, we liked the Motorola Razr 40, and while it doesn't feel like it will be the new V3, it looks destined to become the most popular of the new generation Razr phones. Pros: exquisite flip design with grippy vegan leather exterior. Great primary display with a rather unobtrusive crease. Helpful external OLED. Adequate battery life, fast charging. Loud stereo speakers, good audio quality. Great sustained performance, no throttling, no heating. Great all-round camera experience. Polished software with 3 years of major updates. Cons: basic ingress protection. We never saw 144 Hz refresh rate on the screen unless forced. GPU performance is behind direct competitors. Electronic stabilization needs improvement. Thank you for watching. See you next videos.